All right, so thank you very much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. We got a great live crowd for this webinar. And I'm excited for this topic, sports injury recovery. This is one that I get a lot of questions about. I get calls in my office all the time. For those of you who are new to this venue and new to me, my name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a traditionally trained pharmacist. I actually used to own 2 pharmacies in downtown Baltimore once upon a time. And after having been in my store for a while, 10 years actually, I started to question how well I was really helping my patients. And so I took a look at my blood pressure patients, my patients that had high blood pressure that I was giving them medicines for. And I sat down and I just asked myself a simple question. Am I really helping these people? In essence, are we curing their blood pressure with the medicines? And the answer was no. I was kind of surprised when I kind of analyzed that, but the answer was no. And that, in fact, what was typical was that people needed higher dosages and additional medicines to continue to control their blood pressure. Now, in pharmacy school, we were taught that that's a worsening condition. That's not really true at all. When it comes to the chronic diseases of aging, I'm talking about all the things that we are trying to avoid as we get older. Medicine does not fix anything. All we do in traditional medicine is turn the volume down on what the body's saying. And so the analogy that I always use is about if you're driving around in your car and you see that little red oil light on your dashboard illuminate, you have a couple choices. If you want, you can take it to the mechanic and find out what's wrong and get it fixed, or just take a piece of black tape and put it over the light and you don't see it anymore. Well, that's what we do in medicine for all of the chronic diseases of aging. And with that realization came a huge change in how I approached health and how I approached trying to help people. And so I sold my pharmacies, started doing a radio show about alternative medicine, opened up a practice that includes a wellness center and a holistic pharmacy where we use different tools to help people. But more than anything else, it's about education. It's about helping people understand the ramifications of their decisions. And my contention is that we don't understand the ramifications. So we make a decision based on faulty information, oftentimes coming from some authority, whether that's our doctor, our government, our school, our parents, and we make decisions based on that information, and the result is the generally poor health that we have as we're aging. Now, obviously, the audience that's listening to this right now, sports injury and recovery, might be a little bit different. We might all be a little bit more invested in taking care of ourselves and doing the things that we know we should do to take care of ourselves. But generally speaking, as we age, we do a really poor job of, one, understanding what's leading to the diseases that we have. And that's what my work is about. My contention is that the number one killer in this country is not heart disease. It's not cancer. It's not diabetes. The number one killer is misinformation. And that's what my work is about. So I'd encourage you to explore that, to educate yourself through these webinars. Go to my website, wellbeinggps.com. There's all sorts of information there. There's articles, there's links to this and that, so that you can start to see things in a different way. All right, so let's get about the topic of today. Oh, also, let me just mention that again, if you're listening live and you want to participate, you have a question, just punch it right into your box there and it'll show up right on my screen, and I'll answer it or respond when appropriate. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're talking about sports injury and recovery. And I know this is kind of trite, but I had to put it up there anyways because it really is true, especially with this topic. And especially if you've already sustained some sort of injury in the past, once burned, twice shy kind of thing. And so if you're somebody that has had injuries before, it could just be bad luck, but it's much more likely that it's an indication of certain tendencies and or genetic predispositions that need to be considered as you go forward with an exercise regimen. And we'll talk about some of that prevention as well as treatment today. All right, so number one, why do we end up getting injured in the first place? Well, so what I'm talking about here with poor preparation is really about warm up and stretching. And also want to bear in mind that we can properly prepare with nutrition, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But part of that preparation has to do with setting your body up to respond the way we'd like it to when we exercise. So this can refer to actual technique with things like weightlifting, especially as the weights become heavier and heavier. So the proper thing here is to work with a personal trainer, at least in the beginning, to make sure that you aren't putting undue strain on a part that will cause an injury. But I'm also talking about proper equipment, especially footwear, for like aerobic activities. A ton of injuries happen because of poor fitting or poorly constructed shoes. So again, get your shoes from somewhere that you can get them fit properly. And lots of the better shoe stores these days, athletic shoe stores, will put you on the treadmill with a camera so they can see how your feet turn to make sure that you've got the right equipment. And it is well worth the money. This is a big one from my perspective and my experience, because I believe that we get ideas in our heads that don't necessarily match what our bodies, or the human body in general, for that matter, are really capable of. And I know that's not necessarily what a highly trained or competitive athlete wants to hear. But maybe look at it this way. Consistently having injuries or degeneration may be the body's way of saying that very same thing, that idea that you have in your head about doing something like running a marathon may not be what your body is really designed for. Okay, so a key thing to talk about when it comes to any sort of injury is inflammation. And I'm a little bit of a biochemistry nerd, but I'm going to try to keep this part of the talk interesting and not too technical, but I do think is really vital to understand what's going on underneath the surface to properly respond and recover from injuries. So there's 3 phases of inflammation. There's the acute phase. This is also known as the inflammatory response phase. There's the subacute phase, and sometimes we call that repair and regeneration. And then there's the chronic phase, also known as remodeling, and I'll explain what all that means in a second. So what I'd like to do is go through each one of these phases, explain a little bit about what's happening, the biochemistry behind it, and then we're going to talk about the proper things to do to address it. So the first phase, the acute phase. So this is what happens immediately following some sort of insult or injury to tissue. And by the way, the injury can be physical in nature, like, if you've twisted an ankle or pulled a muscle, but it can also be from a chemical, it could be from bacteria or viruses or fungus, from a burn, even from an offending food. All of that can result in inflammation, and that's the body's way as preserving life, really. All of the physiological changes that happen are designed to allow for protection, healing, and repair. And this will be important to remember when we talk about anti-inflammatory treatments. So the first changes that we talk about, we call vascular changes. And this happens when the injury occurs. And this is what happens. We see a dilation of blood vessels and increased permeability, meaning that things can slip through the blood vessel lining into the space outside of the blood vessel more easily. There's an increase in the blood flow to the local area. Now, why do you think all of these changes would happen? It's because the body knows that when there's an injury, it needs to protect the area, immune factors need to get there quickly, and that there's going to be damaged tissue. So the body delivers the chemicals needed to break down and remove the damaged parts, and then deliver the new parts to be used to repair the damage and to rebuild. Collagen is a big part of the repair and rebuild process. This phase usually lasts somewhere between 3 to 5 days. Now, it can be more or less depending on a bunch of different factors, including your genetics, the diet that you eat, supplements that you may be taking. The 4 hallmark signs. Now, these were originally described back in ancient Greek times. They are redness, pain, heat, and swelling. And you all know that already, right? Because you've turned an ankle and you've seen what happens. It gets inflamed, it gets hot, it hurts a lot, it turns red. So the pain in particular is worse when the injured part is touched or pushed upon, right? Okay. The second phase, subacute. This is the phase where the rebuilding and repair begins to happen. So new fibers are beginning to be laid down, but in a very disorganized manner. That's really what a scar is. There are very weak links between the collagen fibers, so the tissue is weak and susceptible to easy disruption. This is going to become important later when I talk about how we really need to get off of that injured part for a period of time. And that, I know that goes against what we normally would do in our society. This phase can last anywhere from 2 days to 8 weeks. Again, that varies from person to person depending upon the same factors as I discussed before: genetics, diet, activity. Those 4 hallmark signs start to subside a little bit. The swelling and the redness and the heat are starting to go down. There's less tenderness, and just touching the injured area doesn't really cause pain. But when that new tissue is stretched or manipulated, then the pain is there. So it may not hurt to touch anymore, but if you get up and walk on it or start to use it, you're going to feel that pain again. And then there's the third phase, which is that chronic phase. So this is the phase where that tissue gets completely repaired. And the first thing we think about is cellular organization. Stronger bonds exist between the collagen fibers. This phase sometimes never completes because of not resting properly in the beginning or not giving the body everything that it needs to do that repair. So literally, if you have an old injury that's never getting better, you're sort of in this phase 3, and that could be for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be, and that's something that you can change. Ideally, what we see is a complete return to the original range of motion and strength back to that pre-injury status of that, whatever that part was, whether it's a muscle or a joint or whatever. So I also want to talk about the activities that we should institute or avoid for each of these 3 phases of inflammation. And again, the acute phase, the inflammatory response, the subacute, which is repair and regeneration, and the chronic, which is that remodeling. So phase 1. Now this brings up an interesting point, because when does inflammation turn into too much inflammation? It's really hard to say for an individual, but I can state without a fact that many of us are geared towards what I consider to be overzealous or inappropriate inflammatory responses. What I mean is that many of our habits set the stage for these inappropriate responses, and I'll talk about what those habits are in a second. So as a reminder, this phase usually 3 to 5 days. And the biggest thing that you can do is rest. And that's the thing that we're worst at when we've sustained an injury. And there's so many reasons for this, including the many societal constructs that tell us things like no pain, no gain, or don't be a wimp, or just suck it up, or whatever. Sometimes the rest isn't even about the physical activity anymore. Many of us just can't afford not to work or not to cart the kids around or whatever, even if we have an ankle injury, for example. But keep in mind that in this initial phase, the new collagen is just starting to get laid down. It's an attempt to repair the damaged tissue, and it's not well organized. The bond between these fibers is very weak. So it doesn't take much to tear them apart again, kind of like gluing something that's broken, but not letting the glue set completely before you start using it. We all know what happens. So being impatient actually makes it worse. Now, I put down ice and heat, and it's interesting because over the years, I've seen the quote-unquote rules change about this, about when to ice and when to heat and how long to use ice for and what to use first, and it's changed. You know, first it was do this, then it was do that. But here's the general rule of thumb that I follow and I recommend, is that you want to use ice for the first few days, and then you start to want to use heat after that. But again, think about inflammation, the inflammatory response, and what that really means. Because inflammation is the body's attempt to try to fix things. And if we cut down on the inflammation too much, we're interfering with the healing process. And that's when things don't get put together put together the way they should be. And that's when we run into problems, either with re-injury or the body not working the way it was intended to. This is another thing that's really important, is that when you do have an injury, you want to try to maintain the strength and the mobility in the adjoining areas without using the injured area, because that will help you get back to normal quicker down the road. All right, the phase 2 activity, again, that's the subacute. Again, as a reminder, 2 to 8 days. So after the hallmark signs start to subside, that's when it's time to begin very gently using the injured parts. Range of motion exercises, you should start with gentle range of motion exercises. And at first, it's probably best to allow someone else, like a physical therapist, to do these minor manipulations for you. So once the swelling goes down, the heat starts to dissipate. It's not as painful. That doesn't mean jump back on the treadmill or whatever the activity was that you ended up injuring your part. Overdoing it in this phase puts you right back to the place that you were with the original injury. We also want to put attention to joint mobility. This is very important. Starting to put some tension on the injured parts is what helps to organize the collagen that's already been laid down. Remember, in the beginning process of trying to fix things, the body is going to deliver collagen to the area, but it's going to be quote unquote disorganized. Those bonds aren't very good. What makes it organized, what returns that tissue back to normal, is some minor stress or tension on that injured part. That's what starts to model the collagen into what it should be. So it becomes organized then. And organization equals strength and flexibility. And we're talking about light loads here, very light loads on the injured part. Then once we hit phase 3, and again, as a reminder, this is from months to years, stretching, very important. This helps to model the new collagen for its proper use and strength for whatever that injured part is. We're talking about active contractions, meaning that you're starting to use those muscles again and you start to increase the loads. Here's a big issue that I think gets really ignored in this whole topic. And I just want to remind everybody again, if you have questions, just punch them right into the box there and I'll see them. I assume that I'm doing such an excellent job communicating all of this that I haven't brought up any questions yet with people. Well, here's a big part of it. We also have to tend to the emotional issues. I think this is a big part that really gets ignored and maybe is the impetus for us trying to get back at it too soon. So be willing to ask yourself a few questions here. Number one, what's the role of exercise for you? I know for many of us, this is a coping mechanism. It's a way that we sort of de-stress from our days. It may also be tied into how we see ourselves as people and maybe how we value or judge ourselves even. And if this is the case, then what does it say about ourselves when we can't exercise? And does that lead to feelings of insecurity or inadequacy or whatever? And if that is the case, and the only way you're going to know this is some self-exploration, then let's find other ways to soothe ourselves or feel good about ourselves while the injury is healing properly. I'll point out again that being impatient with recovery leads to a much higher incidence of re-injury or injuring other parts too because of compensations that we make with those injured parts. And then there's other lifestyle adjustments that should be considered. And one of them here has to do with our weight. Now, many of us exercise to lose weight or maintain our weight. But if we are all of a sudden less active for a period of time because of an injury, that likely means that we are burning less calories. And so we might need to adjust how many calories we're consuming in order to not gain weight while we're recovering. And again, I will point out that one of the major reasons that I see in people trying to get back to exercise too quickly without letting things repair properly is that concern about the weight. So you might start cutting down on some calories in the meantime. You get it. All right, so how does regular medicine look to treat an injury? Well, we give anti-inflammatory medicines. And then, of course, the most popular of which are called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. We call them NSAIDs. I'm talking about aspirin, Motrin, Nuprin, ibuprofen, which is the generic for Motrin or Nuprin, naproxen or naproxen, which is the generic for that. And all of these are available over the counter and very, very popular. And again, we get these societal messages that tell us no pain, no gain. So if we're hurt, we should just take something to stop the pain instead of trying to let our bodies to repair. And of course, there's all sorts of prescription medicines that are either non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Mobic is one of them. There's a ton of them. And then also the steroids, the steroidal anti-inflammatories like prednisone or Many people maybe have experienced using, if they had a bad injury, using a Medrol dose pack, which is a short period of a high dose of steroids where you taper down. And either one of those, again, interferes with the body doing what it's supposed to do, right? Oh, good. Brandy asked me, what about steroids? There you go. All right. So do these anti-inflammatory factors, whether we're talking about non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or steroids, like Brandy just asked about, do they really help recovery, or are they interfering with things? Remember, inflammation is the body trying to repair the injured tissue. So what happens when we cut down on inflammation? If we make things less painful, we're also much more likely to use those parts before we should. Remember, in the beginning and middle process of this repair, even if we're able to lay down that collagen, it's disorganized. It's not, the bonds between these fibers are not strong. We take an anti-inflammatory, the pain goes away quicker than it should. We get back on that and we tear it down again. And this is a game that we continue to play, because if that happens, then what happens? You get pain, which means, oh, I need more of the medicines. And it's just a downward spiral. And the net result is these things never get fixed. Brandy, the other part of your question was also about, the steroids. Is when we use those steroids, they are known as catabolic steroids. You've heard of anabolic steroids. That's what, the professional athletes try to use to help build up muscle. Well, catabolic steroids break down tissue. And so if you've had injuries where they've given you a steroid shot, like a cortisone injection, it will bring down the inflammation, but it also tears down that tissue. And this is the reason why many professional athletes end up needing joint replacement much earlier in life, because they continuously got those cortisone shots to get them back on the field or court or whatever it is. Let's see, Kevin's got a question for me. Can you also discuss foods which are supposed to help reduce? Yes, I will. I promise. That's coming up in the next slide or two. All right. I also want to point out some interesting studies. So there have been several studies that looked at the use of non-steroidals like ibuprofen in endurance athletes. And I also want to point out again that aspirin is a non-steroidal. So I know there's some people who think, well, aspirin's okay. Does the same thing here. Acetaminophen, which is Tylenol, is not an anti-inflammatory. And so it can help with pain. Number one, it's awful for the liver. And what we're finding out in medicine now is that we sort of have a lifetime accumulation of Tylenol. So using a lot of Tylenol is much more likely to let you have problems with your liver down the road. And number two, same problem. It takes away the pain. Well, if it doesn't hurt, you're going to have the tendency to get on it much sooner. And again, you don't allow for the repair like you should. Jeffrey's pointing out that arnica has been amazing for his shoulder recovery, his labrum recovery. And yeah, arnica is a homeopathic remedy that basically says to the body, hey, repair this. And it's very good for any sort of injury, especially trauma. And here in my area, we have plastic surgeons that send their patients here to get arnica before their surgery, and they bruise less and they have a much better, quicker recovery from that as well. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, so one of those studies looked at using ibuprofen before a big event like running a marathon, and the results were that they felt less pain. But an analysis showed that the same or more factors in the blood indicating inflammation, meaning that the injury was happening without the person actually being aware of it. And obviously that's a prescription for disaster. And by the way, in that study, people were not improving their times even though they were not feeling pain like that. Another study talked about another issue, which is called intestinal injury or intestinal permeability. It's been known for a long time now that endurance athletes and participating in endurance athletics causes an increased permeability in the small intestine. Now, we could hypothesize that that's nature kind of trying to make it so that we will more easily absorb nutrients after having been through or continuously going through that sort of activity. And that makes sense to me. However, the thing that one of the other things about the nonsteroidals is it causes injury to your intestinal tract. And so this is like piling on, and the increased permeability becomes a problem because things that shouldn't get absorbed in our system, like partially digested proteins, start to get absorbed, and then that wreaks havoc. There's a condition that's called leaky gut. It's awful. Many of us are walking around with it. Athletes are not. I did a webinar about it. I'd encourage you to go, listen to that one, and it leads to all sorts of immune problems and, aging and function problems as life goes on. All right, Latrice is saying that having had steroid injections in her SI joint and neck recently due to an accident, the effects are weaning off. Doctors want to do ablation to cut the nerves. What healthier options are there? So that's a tough one, Latrice, because the injury may be such that that tissue isn't going to repair. But there are definitely some things. That that you should consider to try before getting your nerves cut, because once the nerves are cut, that's it. And so that's the last resort. And that's sort of saying, okay, there's no way that this tissue is going to ever get repaired, so we're just going to cut off communication from that tissue. And that's never a good thing. I'm not saying it's not necessary sometimes. Quality of life could be such that, there's no other options. But keep listening. Think about the diet. Think about the supplements I'm going to talk about. Think about working with physical therapy and all those things with the diet, with the supplements. Because if you've already done physical therapy and you say, well, it didn't work, well, I'm going to tell you that maximizing nutrition while doing the physical therapy makes it much more likely for that tissue to want to repair. Nicole's asking, when you were talking about foot support, have you heard of a brand called SAS Footwear? What can you say about it? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that one at all, but I will explore it a little bit. Sounds interesting. I mean, there's I'm in Baltimore. I'm outside of Baltimore, and there's a couple of specific stores here that we use or that we refer people to, and they end up with a bunch of different brands depending on what's going on with them. But I have not heard of that one. Sorry about that. Okay, so how about the role of diet? Someone asked that question. And there's a lot of considerations here, and this is really the empowering part to me, of this discussion, because these are the things that we can do to get our body into a position where it's going to be much more likely to heal. And also, I will point out again that this is not just treatment, this is prevention also. If you are somebody that works out and you don't tend to these things, you're much more likely to get injured. So it's not just about the repair, but it's about your susceptibility as well. Number one, water. And I cannot emphasize this enough. It's hard for me to say that this is the most important thing, because I think every one of these things is important, but water is really, really important. So here's the general rule of thumb. You should be consuming half of your body weight in ounces of water. So, me, I'm 180 pounds, and that means I should be drinking at least 90 ounces of water every day. And also bear in mind that if you are working out, and if you are a hard workouter, you sweat, you lose a lot of your fluid, and so you need to even drink more. So there's different strategies for this. Now, obviously, you want to drink clean water. You don't want to drink tap water, some sort of filtered or spring water. And there's a lot of different strategies for this. One of them might be just fill up a gallon jug in the morning, and by the end of the day, it's got to be empty. I work with women and men who say, if I drink late in the day, then I'm up all night having to go to the bathroom. Well, that means drink earlier in the day. Also, you don't necessarily want to drink all of your water with your meals, because if you drink a lot of water while you're eating, you're just diluting your digestive enzymes or your digestive juices, and you can't digest your food as well. And so the water should be more between meals, and obviously while you're working out. Well, how about the role of the anti-inflammatory diet? So this gets a little complicated, but I'll try to simplify it. Anything that causes your body to be acidic is going to be inflammatory. Anything that causes your body to be acidic is going to be inflammatory. So what are the things that are acidifying to your system? Grains, sugar, animal proteins, alcohol, caffeine, and stress. Those are the things that acidify your system. What alkalinizes your system? Fruits and vegetables. And it's not the nature of the food. Pineapple is very acidic in nature, but it's the most alkalinizing food you can eat. So that's the general rule of thumb there. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't eat animal proteins. It just means that you have to be balanced properly. But get this, if you are an athlete, if you're working out, what happens when you use your muscles? You get a waste product that's called lactic acid. And you need help in clearing that. That's about liver function, and it's also about alkalinizing foods. So generally speaking, I'm a fan of being off of grains completely, and obviously cakes and candies and donuts and sugars and all that kind of stuff. That getting plenty of vegetables, getting fruit, balancing it properly with animal proteins, nuts and seeds, legumes, that kind of thing. So that's the anti-inflammatory diet in a nutshell. Obviously, it can get more complicated than that. Again, I did a webinar about eating grain-free, and I would encourage you to explore that if you want to understand that to a deeper level. The other thing is that there are certain foods within the fruits and vegetables called nightshades that can be inflammatory for certain people. And so that means potatoes, tomatoes, bell peppers, eggplant, and tobacco. Those are the nightshades. So some people will benefit from avoiding those. The balance of fats is the other really important issue here, because there are two kinds of fats. There are fats that lead to inflammation, and there are fats that are work against inflammation. And this goes back to that one of the first points that I made, and that is that some of us, probably many of us, are walking around with this tendency towards inappropriate or overzealous inflammation. And that's not a good thing. Again, inflammation is life-preserving when there's an injury. But the over-response is not good for us either, because that's a constant signal that something's not right in the body. So again, remember, those physiological effects that happen as a result of inflammation, well, what can happen when we inappropriately respond is that all of those factors to break down tissue start breaking down healthy tissue. And that's not a good thing either. So we have to find a balance here. So what are the pro to anti-inflammatory fats? Well, pro-inflammatory fats, also known as omega-6s, they come from vegetable sources. So corn oil, sunflower, safflower, canola, those are pro-inflammatory fats. The anti-inflammatory fats, also known as omega-3s, come from fish, or they come from certain non-animal sources like walnuts or parsley or flax. And they have to be in balance. And what nature intended for us as far as that balance goes is anywhere from a 1-to-1 to a 2-to-1 ratio of pro to anti-inflammatory fats. Well, what is it in the standard American diet? Anywhere from 15 to 30 to 1. That's why we have these inappropriate inflammatory responses. And by the way, allergies, that's just another inappropriate inflammatory response. So we need to get our fats into balance. And then there are all sorts of nutrients. These three in particular play an important role with the collagen, with tissue repair, and removing acids from your body. So vitamin C, zinc, and magnesium are all very, very important. And again, guess where you get those things from? Lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. The same thing that helps alkalinize your system. It's neat the way nature works like that, right? All right, so let's talk about the role of supplements, because my experience is that even if we try to eat a pristine diet, unless you're living on the top of a mountain somewhere, growing your own food, even when we try to eat healthy, those foods aren't everything that nature intended them to be. And so then we start to think about supplementation to help make up. Or maybe just don't have the time to dedicate to our diets the way we should. We're busy, we work, we've got kids, all those things. So let's talk about a few different supplements that will be helpful here. Number one is a proper multivitamin and multimineral supplement. Really, really important. Now, I could ask you to show your hands. If you're taking a Centrum or a one a day or one of those, stop wasting your money because the amounts of the nutrients that are in there are not adequate. They may be adequate to avoid getting the deficiency of a nutrient, but not to maximize your body's function, especially when it needs to rebuild and repair. Let's say that a different way. You've heard of the RDA, and you've been told that RDA stands for recommended daily allowances. That's not true at all. RDA stands for ridiculous dietary assumptions. The amount of a nutrient in the RDA is what you need to avoid getting the deficiency of that nutrient. So the RDA of vitamin C is somewhere between 60 and 75 milligrams, and that's how much vitamin C you need to avoid getting scurvy. That's not how much vitamin C you need to get your tissue to repair and get collagen to maximize. You need much more than that. And those brand name vitamins like Centrum or one a day, they have the RDA of nutrients, which is the bare minimums, and oftentimes the forms of those nutrients aren't what they should be. An example of that would be vitamin E. Natural vitamin E is called D-alpha tocopherol. Those vitamins use synthetic, which is called DL-alpha tocopherol, and it's only about 1/3 as effective in the body. So what would be a good multi, you ask? I heard somebody. There's a ton of them out there. I mean, a lot of the professional companies that we work with here have those, but one of my favorites is by a company called Life Extension, and they make a product called 2 per day. Guess how many you take in a day? 2. That's right. Geniuses, all of you. And it comes in tablets or capsules, and the formula is much more aggressive with its amounts of nutrients, and the forms are proper as well. And it's a really good, very cost effective. I mean, that's the thing that I hear about the one a day or Centrum is that, it doesn't cost that much. Well, we sell the 2 per day tablets for like $15, and that's for a 2-month supply. You can't do any better than that. Gives you a good dose of vitamin D plus all of the nutrients across the board, and it helps you cover the bases, okay? Let's see, got a couple questions here. Brandy's asking me, essential oils versus vitamins. Have you a preference? Yes. Now, are you saying essential fats or are you saying essential oils? Because essential oils are those nice smelling things that come from, different plants like lavender oil. There's no nutritional value there. If you're talking about healthy fats, essential fats, then it's impossible to say one is more important than the other. They're both very, very important. And in fact, I've got this theory that I call the essential 6, and it's the 6 nutrients that all of us should be on. And, regular vitamins and minerals as well as the healthy fats are part of that essential 6. I'd refer you again to the webinar about that. Chad is asking, are the 2 per day good for men and women? Yes. I will tell you that my experience with most of the vitamins out there that are geared towards men or women, it's just window dressing. They don't put enough of those nutrients in there to really make a difference. So the men ones have things in it to help with prostate. But if you have an issue with prostate, it's not going to be enough. And the same thing with women and their hormonal things. So not as good. Let's see. Is that Corrine that says, what about the amount your body can absorb at any given time of various supplements? Your body will absorb what it needs. It's really interesting. So some nutrients are stored in the body, like the fat-soluble vitamins, and your body will then dole it out as it needs it. And the other ones, you want to sort of bathe your tissue so it uses. So, some people say, well, taking vitamins is just making expensive urine. Yeah. Well, first of all, not very expensive. And 2, that's okay. That's an indication that it went through your system and that your body used what it needed and then got rid of the rest. And that's fine. If you want to make expensive urine, take a prescription medicine because that's how it's eliminated and they are much, much more expensive. Okay. So, but like, for example, vitamin C, your body has a mechanism to tell you when you have gotten too much vitamin C. It's called bowel tolerance. And when you take a whole bunch of vitamin C, you'll start to get diarrhea. Bowel tolerance will change for vitamin C as your vitamin C need changes. So let's say that 5 grams of vitamin C is where your tolerance is. If you have a virus, that might go up to 10 grams at one time. But I'm not talking about crazy amounts like that. I'm talking about like vitamin C, 500 milligrams a day, vitamin E, 400 units a day, higher than the RDA, but your body will use it properly. Okay, There's anti-inflammatory herbs, and this is really interesting again because we have to ask the question, when is too much activity in the anti-inflammatory world too much? Because we don't want to really stop inflammation. That being said, the herbs like ginger or turmeric or boswellia, they don't attack inflammation in the same way that anti-inflammatory medicines do. Another way to say that is that they help normalize the inflammatory response. And so if you are reacting in an overzealous way, it'll help calm that down, but they don't really go too far like the anti-inflammatory medicines, even the non-steroidals or the steroidals can. I like to use formulas for this as well, and my favorite one is by a company called New Chapter. It's called Zyflamend, and it's a combination of turmeric, ginger, boswellia, rosemary, a whole bunch of anti-inflammatory herbs together. Very, very effective. Proteolytic enzymes. I love these. And the reason is because these do not work to cut down on inflammation. These work to help that inflammation do its job quicker. So these are very specific enzymes that break down proteins that you take on an empty stomach. If you take these with food, it might help you break down that food, but it's not going to get into your system. What you want to do is take it on an empty stomach, and that will help your body get through that inflammatory process quicker. Some of them come in natural forms like bromelain, which comes from pineapple, or papain, which comes from papaya. But you can find these products that have a combination of a whole bunch of these together. And so if you do have an injury, and especially if you take it in the very beginning process, remember I said that phase 1 lasts 3 to 5 days depending on factors. Taking a proteolytic enzyme is one of those factors that will get it to be less days and then more. And that's really good to help with recovery. That doesn't mean that you can ignore all the other things that we talked about, eat a poor diet, and get back on your injured part quicker. It just means that, or that you still have to be patient. That's what I'm trying to say. Healthy fats, again, very, very important. Fish oil, I can't emphasize enough how important fish oil is. Number one, it's anti-inflammatory. It helps balance the overzealous inflammatory response. It helps lubricate things like joints. It helps cells communicate with each other appropriately, and that's part of this whole game. There's an injury, the injured parts put out some chemicals. That's a signal to the body that something's not right there. That's communication. And fish oil helps that communication happen the way it's supposed to. Appropriate communication is the way to think of it. And then lastly, there are these collagen products. And so you've heard of glucosamine and chondroitin or MSM. My favorite one is called hyaluronic acid, or HA. And this is actually a collagen product. And so adding these back, and you can get like collagen powders that you can use as well. So giving these to the body when you have that injury, while the body is making all of those physiological changes, right? It's causing vasodilation, and it's allowing those dilated blood vessels to become more permeable. If you add some of this collagen to your body as you go through that, well, that's more of the building material to be delivered to the the injured part. And again, if you happen to be vegetarian, you have a harder time doing this sort of repair because of lack of certain parts that your body needs to do that repair. So that's the role of supplements. And I just put this screen up there for you guys to look at. If you have any last minute questions here, we have a minute or two left. Just punch it right in there. This is just a quick archives. Remember, go to Wellbeing GPS, click on the YouTube channel, the YouTube button, and go to right to my channel. And there's all sorts of things in there. Webinars about stress, about weight loss, about getting a good night's sleep. The cholesterol myth, that's a good one because, boy, lowering cholesterol is not helpful for anybody. I have to tell you that. And that's the presentation. We had a great crowd today. I really do appreciate it. I hope you found it useful. I hope you share that information with some folks. And again, don't be shy about getting in touch with me. You can email me, brian@wellbeinggps.com, or you can call me in my office. Toll-free numbers on the website as well. And I'm here to help educate you. I'm here to help help you understand the ramifications of your decisions, including if you turned an ankle or you tweaked a muscle, taking that ibuprofen. There's consequences to that. Marilyn said thank you, and she loves Life Extension products. Me too. All right, everybody. Have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.